Good morning, everyone. This is Chuck Kaiser from Midori Farm, and I'm joined by my good friend, John Walsh. We're going to start Midori Farm Talk number 10, starting a spring garden. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about a lot of different points, but without any further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to John for his self-intro. John, I'm going to let you share your screen. Let me just make you a co-host. You're ready to go, John, anytime you're ready.
Thanks a lot for joining. My name's John Walsh. I'm urban farming consultant here in Tokyo, Japan. It's nice to see so many people here today. Just quickly, I've spent the last 10 years teaching over 1,200 people here in Tokyo about how to grow their own food naturally, using sunlight and soil and water and no chemicals. And I've basically been setting up gardens around Tokyo, over 50 so far, and also growing lots of food at local community gardens, which has been one of the most amazing experiences and taught me about how productive just a tiny little plot of land can be. So this morning, we're basically going to be combining Chuck's 12 years of countryside farming experience with my 10 years of city growing experience to hopefully answer as many questions as you have. And this particular presentation has been inspired by this book, which I hope you can see. It's called Town Mouse and Country Mouse. And Chuck's the country mouse, I'm the town mouse. And in this book, it's one of my favorite children's stories. This town mouse gets together with a city mouse, and they find that their lifestyles are completely different. But that's not going to be the point here, because Chuck and I, we're basically combine his countryside experience with my urban farming experience to hopefully answer all your questions. Just for signing up for this presentation, you can all get these freebies mentioned in the brochure that I hope you saw. And the first one is 15 vegetable growing tips. The next one is a raised garden building guide. And the third one is 10% off a urban farming super pack. If you want to get these, just write your name and email address in the comment section, and I'll shoot them out to you later. Okay, so so I just want to take you through a really quick presentation of what I do so you'll get the idea. Just going to change screens. I spend most of my time teaching at schools, just the full cycle seed to salad food production in urban spaces, as opposed to Chuck, who teaches in the countryside and who basically farms. I set up gardens around the city. This one is the biggest project so far at the Grand Hyatt Hotel in Tokyo. And I work at schools, mainly teaching kids how to grow food. And if they don't have land, we use the rooftops, we use the fences and whatever spare space they have. And they grow their own food, which is one of the highlights of my programs. This one here was last November at the end of autumn. We had at one of the schools that I teach at, we had a big garden breakfast where the kids basically ate what they had been growing for the last 2 months. And they got to experience their own food and what it tasted like after growing it. And this is some examples here of rooftop gardens for places that don't have any exposed soil on the ground. And if schools don't have any exposed places, any exposed soil, we can just use the fences. And one of the big parts of my school urban farming programs is a community support aspect, where I encourage schools to basically give back and supply school grown food to local food banks via my Food Havens Tokyo strategy. And the goal of that is to basically get schools to grow some and give some. Just a 4-word strategy: grow some, give some. And it's been happening, and it's been getting bigger and bigger as the years go by. And you can see what happens here. Kids basically grow their own food, and we donate it to Tokyo's main food bank, Second Harvest Japan Food Bank. This was 3 months ago in Tokyo, and then this was the largest food donation we've ever done for this particular school. And all this food gets taken away and eaten on the same day, so it has an immediate impact. And this just quickly is the strategy to basically get as many schools and companies as possible in a particular city to grow some and give some to community support organizations, schools, charities, and so on, to basically supply free and healthy food to people that need it. I also teach at universities and set up gardens at kindergartens. There's a few different kindergartens here, and run workshops at embassies and so on, and clubs and companies around Tokyo. Yeah, and for people who are wondering, who have never done this before, there's a whole lot of places in this city that we can grow food. On rooftops are probably the best place. At work, and community gardens, which are few and far between in places like Tokyo, but if you are lucky to live in a town that does have some community gardens, it's a good idea to try to access them and grow your own food. I also teach balcony gardening and vertical farming, and teach people how to grow food at home. Just sort of quickly flicking through some photos here. This one here is on top of a train station in Tokyo, and this is just a random wall that's been converted to grow food and flowers. And if you don't have any land at all, you can just hook up planters to a chain and grow food in thin air. Okay, so that's pretty much what I do. Now, over to you, Chuck.
Well done, John. I guess you want to stop your screen share. While you're doing that, must I say, I am very impressed, as I'm sure everybody is here, with what you're doing. You're not only bringing the garden to the schools, but then you're bringing the food to the people who most need it. I think that's a wonderful program, not just for the people who need it, but also for those students who get to witness that and be a part of that community outreach. I think that's very, very important. What a great social initiative that is. I hope more people can get involved in such programs like that. All right, very, very good. Well, we're going to slide on over to me, I guess. I'm going to start my little self-intro. I'm going to share my screen here. John, you can see that all right? Everybody can see?
Yep.
All right. Like I said, my name is Chuck from Midori Farm. My backstory is, I think, a little bit interesting, and I apologize for those of you who've seen it before. I've done this presentation a couple of different times. I started farming in the mountains of Shiga Prefecture, about an hour north of Kyoto City, about 12 years ago. And I didn't start farming because I thought farming was a good idea. I just wanted to spend more time in this beautiful area, full of snow and full of sunshine and full of clean water and fresh air. Great place for my kids to play. But I just decided, yeah, I'm going to start a garden just so I can spend more time up here, you know, have an excuse to come up here and stuff like that. And boy, did I know nothing when I first started. You know, I just throw a few seeds in and see what happens. And you can barely make out the negi that I'm growing in this field here because I didn't bother weeding or even making raised beds or anything like that. But after my first year of failure, the second year, I was actually able to get some of these lovely tomatoes, and my carrots were quite twisty, but they were very sweet and really inspired me to keep going. So the next year I planted a second season, and I not only had the tomatoes, but I had the lettuces and other things. And this gave me a real source of food then, which was wonderful. It was something that, of course, you're going to get food, Chuck. You're a gardener, you're a farmer, but it was totally a surprise to me that I could actually produce food. And it was much thanks to these two gentlemen here, the elders of the village where I started farming. Uh, they're just fantastic people who are so full of life and information and wisdom. And they were so happy to help me and give me advice and get me started. Because like I said, I didn't know anything when I first started. I'd never even put seeds in the ground before I did on my own farm. I never volunteered. I never read a book. So I asked these gentlemen a lot of questions. I also followed Chris Blanchard and Farmer to Farmer, one of the best podcasts ever made for farmers. There's more than 200 episodes over an hour each. He interviews farmers all over North America about what they're growing, how they're growing it, how they're selling it, what works, what doesn't work. Unfortunately, Mr. Blanchard passed away, but his legacy lives on. I just encourage anybody who's interested in growing to just give a listen to some of his programs. They are gold. And then I was still listening to Mike McGrath. He is full of beans and full of wisdom, and he's just a hilarious radio show, You Bet Your Garden, and a tremendous website he's got built up where you can type in your questions and get all these answers and links to other things and products and stuff like that. So fueled by Mr. Blanchard and Mr. McGrath, I was actually able to do such things as create raised beds. On the left, you see my first attempt using the offcuts from the sawmill in the village and filling it with great soil and compost that I was started making. And on the right side, you see my first attempt at a Spanish trellis for my peppers. I got to say, if you're growing peppers and you're not supporting them, you're not doing your pepper plants justice. Those suckers want to stand up to produce for you as well as they can. So one of the tricks I learned was this Spanish trellis for trellising a whole line of peppers at the same time. Like I said, composting, it's a huge part of my life now. I've got 2 buckets outside for my community to drop their kitchen waste off in, and I'm always toting them up to the mountains to add to my compost pile. Make sure you're mixing your vegetable scraps with dry leaves or momigata or some sort of a brown material so that it will break down properly. But I gotta say, after doing all this composting and Spanish trellising and raised beds, suddenly I was getting a lot more vegetables. I mean, this is a one-day harvest for a single guy who's not selling any vegetables at this time. And that wasn't even everything, but that's 11 baskets full of zucchini, cucumbers, okra, all sorts of squash and everything else. I had to eat all this. I couldn't even give it all away. And then the potatoes came in and oh my goodness, what am I going to do with all these potatoes? I mean, I love potatoes as much as anybody, but there's no way I could eat all these potatoes. So I had to learn about distribution. And I started with restaurants like this fine lady from Kyoto City. She was my first customer. And then I tried some farmers markets, spending my day off selling my vegetables, which was interesting, but I'd rather be spending time with my son. So this wasn't such a good fit. I set up a few farm stands like this one, just on the side of the road for people to just, honor system, pay and take what you want. But this was the game changer for me, was setting up my own CSA, community supported agriculture, which is called Teikei in Japanese. It's when people subscribe, they give me $100 and I'll give them 5 baskets when they want them, depending on where they are, maybe 4 baskets if there's a delivery cost. And this was the game changer. Like I said, it's fresh. I mean, there's no packaging. Everything went into my basket at the farm, into my car, and right to their door. I presented them with the basket. And I know a few people on this group right now have been recipients of those baskets. And might I say, thank you for your support again. And I hope to be restarting baskets again in April. The winter this year has been quite severe, and it's given me a slow start on the spring, but I'll be doing it. Don't you worry. Let's get back to it. Then I started to want to do these events, near the farm, because it's such a beautiful area where I'm growing vegetables. I wanted to share this with everybody. So we would do these camping events and go hiking up to the giant tree and things like that. Probably the highlight of it all is swimming in this clean river, taking people onto the farm, especially kids, to do things, just teaching them how the plants grow, how to seed mushroom logs and things like that. I've been a teacher for over 20 years, rounding 25 this year, I suppose. And I've taught science and English. And I got to say, I've never encountered such a wonderful natural classroom as a garden. And I'm sure to something John can attest to, kids are just so interested in how everything's going. And what am I saying? Everybody is interested in how things are growing, not just the kids, the grown-ups as well. So it's wonderful to have people out there to take part. And it became such that I couldn't keep my friends away. Here's my son with me in the tiller a couple of years ago. And then my friends saw that picture on Facebook. They said, I want to give it a go too. I was like, really? Okay. And so hence was born my volunteer program. And I had these fine people up, and then I had some more fine people up until somebody convinced me, there's a whole organization called Workaway, which will hook you up with volunteers all over the world. And this is kind of similar to woofing, which is for me, the original volunteering program, and much more popular. But this Workaway was a little more accessible to the younger people of this generation. So they found this was a good fit, and I had volunteers coming nonstop until COVID shut me down. And it's fantastic to have people out to the farm. They come from all over the world. This gentleman in the foreground's from France. The one in the background, he's from Switzerland. And they volunteer with me for months at a time, months and months. So it was just fantastic. I didn't have to travel the world. The people would come to me. And not only did they have fun, not only did they learn about farming, but they met each other. One woman from France, another man from France, another woman from Canada, they're lifelong friends now. And they're my lifelong friends as well. So what connections and wonderful things happen when you open your doors to volunteers. But I was also told that, Chuck, to make a little extra money, you could become a host on Airbnb for an experience. So I pick people up in the city, as I'm going to go up to my farm anyway. I live in Kyoto City, by the way, so I drive to my farm about an hour every day. So I pick people up on my way. They come up to the farm with me. They have an experience. We eat lunch by the river. They get to play with their child. The child gets to experience some wonderful things. They get to meet other couples who've come up with me and have a great day of it, even if it's raining. And then I drive them back to the city and I get paid for it. Now, as an organic farmer, my focus is creating vegetables and selling to the public. But in a lot of ways, we need supplementary income these days. So I try to do everything I can to promote Midori Farm and organic farming while trying to make a little bit of money as I can. And sometimes big groups even come up and they have a great time. So over the past 5 years, I had several events and volunteers as well as tours that really helped me balance out my life as a vegetable grower. Because not only is the income important, but it's also a bit lonely out there all by myself. What was new in 2021, I took on farming full-time, finally quitting a teaching career of over 20 years. I started my farms in Keihoku as well as Kutsuki. I really ramped up my YouTube channel. I'm just applied for my 3rd year of a grant program to support my sweet potato community farm. And I'm doing a lot more online farm events, much like this one. What's next for me? Well, I'm starting a new program for Japanese people to have a farm experience in English. They'll come up with me for the day and we'll be able to talk about gardening, get your hands dirty, eat some fresh food, learn some recipes and have an adventure and practice your English. I'm also starting a consulting program where I'll be able to consult with people live. I'll go out to their location and give them some advice, or they can just show me from a video on their iPhone. That's fine too, just bring me to your garden for an hour and I'll tell you what's eating your tomatoes or why your soil isn't good or how to improve your drainage and things like that. And finally, but not least, SOS Green Screening is a wonderful film festival project we're starting this year to shine the spotlight on people who are trying to make a difference with sustainable initiatives all over the world, creating a short video from 3 to 10 minutes long, 1080p, submissions due August 31st. And the film festival will be held October 22nd, which is a Saturday in the fall. And it's going to be here in Kyoto, but you don't have to be in Kyoto to join. You can join online. It'll be a Zoom event as well. And you don't have to be in Kyoto to submit. We hope for submissions all over the world, as I said. For more information, you can contact me through my website, midorifarm.net, or you can just send me an email or find me on Facebook at Chuck Kaiser. Now, I got to say, John, I'm excited to get into this talk, so I'm going to stop my share and let's get to it. What do you say?
That was really impressive, mate. Yeah. Those the countryside and the river tours look really, really good, especially for the urban people like me who get out to the riverside like it's once or twice a year.
That
looks really good. Yeah, really good.
It is great.
Okay.
Great.
So should we kick off into
That
the first
sounds
question,
great.
how to
That
select
sounds
the
great.
ideal
Yeah.
garden location?
Yeah, John, what do you do to select your best garden location in the city? I'm interested.
Yeah, well, one of the big differences uh, between countryside farming that you do and the city growing that I do is basically shade. And shade can basically make or break a potential garden site. So it's important to basically, when you're looking to find the best place to set up your garden, just look for the place that gets the most sunshine and try to put most of your plants there. Now that could possibly be the rooftop. If you have access to a safe, accessible rooftop, then your rooftop should possibly be the first place that you consider. But you need to be careful about typhoons. When the typhoon season hits in about June, July, I think it is, you need to sort of make sure that nothing's going to get going to sort of get blown off your rooftop and hit people down below. If you're growing food at home on a balcony or a deck or something like that, you may have to raise up your planter boxes and pots just to maximize the exposure to the sun so that they'll basically grow more. And especially if you're growing tomatoes and cucumbers at home, which need maximum sunshine because they use so much energy to produce the fruit, they need to go in the place that gets the maximum sunshine. No excuses really, otherwise they won't grow many tomatoes. Yep. So what do you think, Jack? How do you find the best place to grow?
Before I cut in on that, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. Since you're growing at schools, how are the locations for the gardens at schools selected?
That's a really good question, actually. Yeah. We basically look for number one, does a school have exposed soil? Yes or no? Some of the schools that I've taught at, the entire campus is covered in concrete. So we need to look at growing on walls, using vertical farming, or especially growing on fences. And some schools are like completely surrounded by fences, which are ideal growing spaces to grow food vertically. So we don't need a garden in the ground to grow food. We just need a sunlit vertical location. And if possible, the rooftop. It all comes back to the rooftop when it comes to city farming, because rooftops typically have no shade. But they have to be safe, which might involve the school having to talk to the architect of the building and asking them, is this rooftop safe for X many students to get up there and walk on? And they'll either come back with a yes or a no. But that's critical.
I would think water is also an issue for it. I mean, you need to have a hose or a tap or something up there to water.
Yeah, it's really important to find to basically sort of find out. Basically check where the water supply is, check where the nearest tap is, and if you're lucky, your rooftop's going to have a tap. But if not, you may have to basically carry like water containers up from one of the higher floors. So if a school doesn't have any soil in the ground, we just use planter boxes and pots and vertical spaces. It doesn't normally hold us back, but it's always best to have exposed ground because plants are always happiest to grow there.
Right on.
What about you?
Well, for me, John, it's more an issue of where the farms are already, because in my experience, I've never really set up a farm where there was never a farm. There's always been gardens before where I'd set up. And I must take this moment to explain that I've never bought a farm. I've paid rent on a couple, but most of them are completely free to use. And so basically, how do I select a location? Well, I look at the empty farms that are available and I ask, hey, can I use that farm? And most of the time people say, of course you can. And I think a lot of people might be surprised that I don't even have to pay money for those. But as a gardener, we know that it's not just the soil, it's not just the plants that we're growing, it's the soil. It's the structure of the earth that we're creating with lots of organic matter, lots of microorganisms and worms and things like that that make this whole community where plants can thrive. And that takes years, if not a lifetime, to really create this wonderful soil, the medium in which these plants can grow robust and strong and be strong enough to even fight off diseases and pests for that matter. So for a farmer to create this wonderful soil and for 40 years to enjoy the bounty of it, and then become too old or injured or sick or too busy to continue, and then in 1 year watch it all go back to nature, which isn't such a bad thing, but to see all that hard work wasted and now growing all the weeds that you've been pulling for 40 years, the farmers are very happy for someone to take over and be a steward for that land and carry the torch, so to speak. So I think there'd be a lot of gardens available if you're living in the countryside and interested. You might just ask your neighbor, hey, I see you've got an empty plot there. Would you mind if I grew some vegetables? And I'll even give you some of them. And I think that you'd probably be surprised at how agreeable they would be about that. So for me, finding a location has a lot to do with just chance and where locations are already. However, to give people advice on how to select a garden location, as John was saying, even in the countryside, you want to make sure you have a lot of sunshine. Growing in the Satoyama area, as I do, which is the area where the mountain meets the valley, quite a robust location to grow vegetables, but also as you're at the foot of a mountain, you've got to make sure you're getting enough sunshine. Now, I do grow in a pretty narrow valley in Kutsuki and Shiga, and which limits how much sun there is during the day. So when I'm setting up my garden, I always make sure I'm very efficient, and I set the beds up running north-south. And that's so the sun passes over east to west, and all the plants are getting full sun. They're not being blocked by a tall row of beans next to a bed of lettuce. That lettuce won't get enough sunshine because it's blocked by these beans. So setting an ideal location in the countryside has a lot to do with how much sun as well, but also your proximity to fresh water. So make sure there's water available as well.
Do you test your soil?
I have
before
never
you
had a
start
soil
growing?
test done. You know, I've looked into it. I've read some blurbs about soil tests on the internet and how unreliable they are. So I just have never done it. I've just worked with my soil kind of old school and see what works and doesn't work. And I think the secret to doing that is don't overdo any sort of soil amendment that you're going to put in. If you're going to put in manure or compost or whatever, don't overdo it, because plants don't need to grow in such a rich soil. In fact, some of them won't grow very well if the soil is too rich. You want to make it light and loamy, but you know, a little bit of compaction and a little bit of just regular rocks and dirt in there, that's good for the plants. It gives them the impetus to grow deep roots and to search for those nutrients, which is very important. How about you, John? Do you do soil tests?
No, but at the schools that I work at, we basically typically change half the soil every year. So each year we basically grow in the 2 seasons, spring, summer, and then autumn, winter. And then in the start of the following year, we normally take off half of the soil that we've been using either in planter boxes or in the ground, and then add some new soil, and then just sort of mix it in so that the nutrients from the new soil go back into the old soil, because those nutrients are critical, absolutely critical. And of course, they all get sucked out by the plants. So it's really important to put them back. And I'm also working with schools. I'm hoping to start some composting programs with schools this year to basically channel their kitchen waste and get the kids to compost it. And then we put it back onto the garden so that the kids that I teach can grow food for the kitchen. So it's just a whole big cycle.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I think
and that's going to cut down school waste. So yeah.
I think
but
a composting program is great.
soil testing, no, I haven't done that yet. I basically just look at what grows, and we always, and at most of the schools that I work at, we just grow heaps. Nutrient content, not a big one at the moment. I probably should test for it, but it's not a major thing at the moment. Yeah. Okay.
Well, you talked about removing half the soil. What do you do with that soil that you've removed?
Oh, yeah. The school can use it for landscaping. They can like sort of use it to make little mounds, or yeah, they can, or we can just sort of dump it on old soil and it sort of gradually mixes in. Yeah. Some people, they sort of reuse it by basically drying it out to kill bacteria and then mixing that into their existing soil. Yeah, to basically reuse soil. But yeah, we are not doing that at the schools yet. That's a good question though.
Yeah, I mean, Actually, I think we've all probably walked down the road in Japan and seen somebody dumping out their planter boxes onto a blue sheet or something to kind of air out their soil. And I've realized that one of the reasons they do that is to find the beetle grubs as well
Yeah.
that tend to get in there. And then they're called cutworms for a reason. They're just basically a big fat white caterpillar that crawls through the soil and uses these giant pinchers on the front of its mouth to cut the plants down. And if they happen to be nice succulent broccoli plants, well, your broccoli's dead, you know. So
Game
yeah.
over. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just going on to the next question about how to set up in-ground gardens and balcony, vertical and rooftop gardens. Yeah. What do you look for when you want to basically look for that? Yeah. What do you? What's the first thing that you do when you start to set up a garden on a site that you've chosen?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is make sure I can run the beds north-south if possible. I'm going to make sure there's a fresh water supply there. And then once that's set, basically what I'll do is I'll go in there and I'll lay out my beds if I have to do them new. And then I'll go ahead and run the tiller or the tractor through there to mix in the soil and to make the nice, neat rows. And then I'll cut in some compost. Almost every year I'll put a little bit of calcium in the soil. That kind of gives it a refresher, you know. And if I'm thinking about planting something like lettuces or broccoli or something green and leafy, I might add some manures or some aburakasu, the oil cake, neem cake, oil cake, organic fertilizer. There's a lot of choices for organic farmers out there, but compost is always good in the soil. Now, one thing I'll also add, which maybe people don't know about, is momigata, which is kind of the shell or the husk of the rice. When they first harvest it, they knock that off. And then basically you have genmai or brown rice. And then they'll polish that and make white rice. And the polish process, you end up with nuka, which is popular for nukazuke, which is a way of pickling things in Japan. But nuka is also a good soil amendment. You can add it to your soil to kind of bulk up your organic matter. But the husk, the momigata, that's the kind of thing that's it's almost bulletproof. It just doesn't break down. 3 or 4 years later, it'll still be there. But what you can do is add it to your soil. And what it'll do is basically lighten your soil, create better drainage, and make it so your soils are a bit fluffier, easy to work with, and the plants can penetrate with the roots better. So that's one of my secrets for you guys today is momigata. You can get it most places. If you live in the country, farmers are just looking to give it away, basically. So it's easy to acquire, it's cheap, it's organic, and it's a great soil amendment. Again, it doesn't give any nutrients to your soil, but it just makes it a bit lighter. If you've ever bought potting soil, you see these little white balls in there that kind of look like styrofoam, right? Well, those are actually called perlite, which is a natural occurring mineral. So it's organic that they superheat and then it puffs up kind of like popcorn. And then you add that to your soil. So don't worry, it's not styrofoam in your organic soil. It's just perlite. But perlite is really easy and cheap to get in the States. And the two guys who I've listened to, Chris Blanchard and Mike McGrath, they both say, oh, just go down to the home center for $3. You can get a bag bigger than you, and it only weighs about 5 pounds. Well, here it's quite a bit more expensive. And so as an alternative to that, I recommend using this momigata rice husk. That's a great way to lighten your beds. How about you, John? What do you do to set up your balcony, vertical, and rooftop gardens?
Yeah, well, another main point, what I sort of mentioned before about basically finding the most, the part that gets the most sunshine. Now, that works if you, like if you're living, like on, for example, the 10th floor of a mansion, that works if you're on the sunny side. But if you happen to be on the dark side of a building and your the balcony doesn't get much sun, that might completely stop your gardening plans right there. So what I'd like to do right now is just to sort of mention some tips for people who don't have growing space and who want to grow their own food. And just a few tips is, number one is just talk among your friends. If you don't have space to grow food yourself, or if you're living on the dark side of a mansion, just talk to your friends and ask them, do they have some exposed land at home? Do they have access to an exposed rooftop on top of the place they live or work? And even check out your own workplace. Like if you work at a school or office, check with the building manager and check whether the rooftop space is usable to grow your own food up there. Yes. So point number one, to gain access to growing space if you don't have any, just talk among your friends and your workmates. Number two, community gardens, especially in places in the big cities like Tokyo and Osaka. Community gardens are a wonderful place to grow food. They're typically really cheap to rent, and the rental period normally starts in mid-March and goes until January 31st. So it's about 10 months, really cheap. I've been renting community garden plots for the last 9 years and paid about 5,000 yen to rent them for 10 months. And I normally grow about 25 to 30,000 yen worth of fresh vegetables. So it totally makes financial sense. And the third way to gain access to unused space is just look around your town. Look for unused land next to car parks, for example, or empty building sites even. They would be ideal to be converted into community gardens. Any spare space on where the sun shines. If you walk past some space and find it, try and talk to who's controlling it or owning it, and ask them if it's okay for you to grow food there. And if they need some more convincing, just offer to split the food with them. So say, hey, if you let me use your empty car park, I'll grow food and you can have half of it. If that doesn't work, go somewhere else, but that will probably work, especially for people who, they just like local food, which seems to be more and more people these days. And getting back to, if you're growing at home, just look for the sunniest place. So shifting on to the next question.
Yeah,
How to
John,
create
I'd like to ask you about a planting schedule. How do you set one up?
Yep, a planting schedule. That's basically, you basically, first of all, need to decide what you want to eat. And then it's a good idea to find out how long those plants take to grow. For example, growing spinach from seed takes about 4 weeks. Growing lettuces from seed can take 7 to 8 weeks. Growing baby leaf can take 12 days, 12 to 14 days. So if you're growing to a plan, for example, at schools, they run harvest events and also donation events, with the fixed date where we're planning to harvest and or donate. So I basically work backwards and work out, right, bigger plants take longer to grow. So we work out the planting date based on the harvest date or the donation date, and just work backwards based on the planned harvest date. Gardening schedules, it's important to know how long plants take to grow, of course, and also to get the large vegetables growing at the earliest possible point. For example, cabbages grow huge, broccoli grow huge. Get them started early, and preferably start growing from seedlings rather than seeds. That will save a good month. So get the larger plants growing early and then scatter the rest depending on what you want to grow, right through to the end of the growing season. And here in Japan, the spring summer growing season starts about mid-March, goes until about mid-June. It's about 3 months. And then the autumn winter one starts in mid-September, goes until about November, about mid-December. So we've got about 3 months both sides of the summer, which is great. And what about you, Chuck? How do you plan?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. That's pretty much what I do as well. I balance my planting schedule with seedlings or seeds, depending on what I want to plant. And basically for my spring garden, I plant as soon as I can. There's some things like carrots that need a certain temperature to really germinate, but there's no problem with throwing those seeds in there at any time and just waiting for the soil to warm up. And you can speed things along if you use something like a black ground cover for a couple of days that'll get hit by the sun and warm that soil up and kind of give you a head start on those seeds. Potatoes are also a good one. You can plant your potatoes in the middle of winter. You can dig out of bed and throw them in the bed and just bury them and then let the snow melt off. And by springtime, when the soil's warm enough, they'll just start growing. So there's a lot of seeds you can do that with. I wouldn't do that with things like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants, because they're such fragile plants that if they even start to germinate a little bit, they're going to die in the cold, or if they don't get all the things that they need right at the same time. For me, creating a planting schedule is a bit different from John, perhaps, because I'm growing 3 seasons of vegetables: spring, summer, and fall. And there'll be different plants in there. I mean, spring and fall will see a lot of the same things like cabbages and broccolis and things like that. And in the summer, you get all your solanaceous, the sun-loving plants like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants and cucumbers and beans and things like that. But the important thing for a planting schedule for a farmer like me is to make sure I am rotating my crops. I don't want to grow potatoes where I grew potatoes last year. I don't want to grow tomatoes where I grew potatoes last year because they're in the same family. So if you're having trouble growing something, you might be because you're overlapping and you're not rotating your crops properly. It's a very important thing because diseases will stay around in the soil much easier. So if you're growing tomatoes in the same soil for 3 years, you're probably getting a lot of black spots on your plants, and they're not going to be able to fruit very well because there's a Versillium wilt or something else is going to get in there, and it's just going to take over, and it's not going to let anything grow. So ideally, you want to let the land rest 2 or 3 years before you replant solanaceous in the same place. So that's an important thing to consider when whether you're growing in a container or in open ground. So, but as far as a planting schedule, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. You find your frost dates, you go back a couple of weeks, you sow the soil, you sow the seeds indoors, let them sprout, then you put them out when the weather's warm enough to harden them off and get ready to go.
Getting back to the ground cover that you mentioned at the start, what kind of ground cover do you use, and what's the main purpose of it?
Well, ground cover, that's a good question. Ground cover has a couple of different uses, and it's also called mulch or plastic mulch if you go plastic. Yeah. So ground cover can have a couple of different reasons. For one of the main reasons people use ground cover is to suppress weeds. Basically, weeds are going to grow up all around your plants because you're creating this wonderful soil. Everybody wants to join the party. You know, all the grasses and the weedy flowers and the thistles and the horsetails are going to find a way in there, you know. And so that'll kind of protect it from that. Like I said before, the ground cover will also help warm the soil a little bit. It'll also help it to retain moisture. It also can block out some of the insects, some of these beetles that like to lay their eggs in the soil. It can block those as well. Now, as far as what to use for mulch or ground cover, you could use the black plastic, like I said. You could also use leaves scattered about on your beds, but you can also use kind of a green mulch. I've sometimes grown clover in a bed around my vegetables as a kind of a ground cover, because then the weeds can't really compete. Clover grows quite thick. You actually kind of have to dig a hole out of the clover and put your zucchini or tomato plant in there and then kind of keep weeding it back, because until your tomato gets established, that clover will fight for it. But the great thing about clover is it's in the legume family, which means it captures nitrogen out of the air and it fixes that into the soil. So it actually fertilizes your bed for you. So one thing about crop rotation is you can grow beans and peas almost any time, and it's going to nutrify your soil for your next crop. So there's a lot of different choices for ground cover, I'd say.
Interesting. What about rice paddies? Like if you take over like a rice field, how do you make sure that you get water supply to it if it's not there at the moment?
Well, I wouldn't farm in a place where there's no water. I've done it before, and carrying buckets taught me a valuable lesson. It's not worth it. I mean, when you're growing to scale, there's just no way you're going to be able to do it. I have 2 pumps that'll pump water, 200 meters to my farm from the river now to avoid that sort of thing. But if you are growing in an abandoned rice field, you might want to check around with the community to see if they're still working irrigation trenches. They'll often have these concrete trenches built all around the rice fields to flood them, and they'll open a dam or a lock on the river or something and flood the trenches, and people can open those up to the rice fields and flood them that way. Well, the beauty of that is you can use that for your vegetables as well. Of course, you don't want to keep your vegetables field flooded for months at a time. But what I do now in Kyoto, my new location, is I'll open the floodgates and I'll leave them open for a couple of hours, then I'll close them, and the water will get, maybe 10 centimeters high all over the farm. And that'll give everything a nice, slow, deep watering. And I find if I do that once a week, everything's really, really happy. So it really helps to not have to drag hoses and watering cans everywhere if you can just flood your field all at the same time while you're doing something else. So it's quite a nice option.
That's good. Yeah. Moving on. what are the best tips that you found for buying equipment at garden stores and home centers?
Oh,
Where do you go? And yeah, and what kind of recommendations do you have for what to buy?
well, my son will attest. I never pass a home center without going in and checking it out. There's kind of a fetish of mine. I love garden centers and home centers. I'm quite a do-it-yourself kind of person, so even the carpentry side is very attractive. But you got to be careful when you're buying your gardening equipment. You don't always want to go for the cheapest options. If you're getting something that you're going to be using often, like a good pair of scissors, I really think you should invest in a good pair of scissors, because those will be your best friend. And if they work well and you can keep them sharp, all the better. As far as larger items like tillers or pumps or things like that, you want to do your research online before you go to the home center. I mean, you bring your smartphone with you. I'm always in the home center shopping on prices, making comparisons, looking at ratings on equipment. As far as bags of soil and compost and things like that, most garden centers now will have organic choices, which is nice. And if they don't, go to the next garden center and see if they have it. That's what I do, is try to find the ones that give you organic choices. And yeah, how about you, John? What do you do in the garden centers?
Yeah, well, here in Tokyo, we've got sort of quite a good choice of home stores that have garden centers. And yeah, I've checked most of them out. Just for people who live up here in Tokyo, and I'm not sure what home centers are like outside Tokyo in terms of the actual companies, but up here in Tokyo, many people go to Tokyo Hands, which is a pretty pricey place that has a really small selection. Kyoto or D2, that's a chain around Tokyo. They have a reasonable supply, but not fantastic, of seedlings. And lots of flowers, but not many vegetable seedlings if you want to grow gardens. Shimachu is probably slightly better than Kyoto. But my personal favorite is Super Viva Homes in Toyosu, which has it's a massive home store with an indoor and outdoor garden center. But the number one, Ozaki Flower Park in Narima-ku, which is not a home center. It's a garden center. It's a super center that only specializes in plants. It has like everything you'll ever need there. In the city, you're most likely going to be growing in a container, and home centers typically have lots of plastic containers, unfortunately, followed by terracotta, like terracotta pots and square, largish containers, and followed in the far distance by, you may be lucky to find some wooden containers and wooden planter boxes. It's important to make sure that any planter boxes that you purchase have water drainage holes down the bottom. And of course, getting back to soil, which is one of the most important things to grow good food. If you're not able to read the kanji on the soil packets, just check the photos on the same soil packets. And if there's photos of vegetables, then that soil is good to grow vegetables. If there's photos of flowers, that's good to grow flowers. What you're looking at to grow vegetable gardens is the soil that has photos of vegetables and flowers, and that's basically general purpose soil that's obviously good to grow flowers and vegetables. Get that. That will most likely contain fertilizer, which is like gasoline for your plants. And as Chuck was saying before, look for organic soil, which up here in Tokyo is few and far between. I've only seen one kind of organic soil, and that's at Super Viva Home Center in Toyosu. It's only slightly more expensive than the regular stuff. But the bottom line is all your gardening gear in Tokyo is going to be dirt cheap. You can buy like a 25-liter bag of soil for about the same price as a large Starbucks cup of coffee, about the same price, really cheap. All your gardening gear is cheap. This is a good hobby to have. Yeah. So question for you, Chuck. Insects, you probably get a lot more of them in the countryside than we do here in the city. What do you do to make sure that you don't take any home with you from the home center?
Oh, so now we're talking about seedlings, right? Yeah, that's the thing, is how many people out there have seen a lovely little tomato plant and a bag of soil and a pot all for about 1,000 years, like, oh, I'm going to grow tomatoes this year, and they bring them home, and they carefully water and feed the plant, and then it just dies. It just dies. What is it? What happened to it? Oh my God, there's all these little tiny microscopic red bugs all over them, or these terrible aphids, or these awful caterpillars suddenly just appeared on my broccoli. What happened? And well, of course, if you're planting in the countryside, these insects are all over the place. So it's very common for me to have these problems just because you can't get away from it. And there are ways to manage them, but I won't go into those. But what I would like to advise people about is before you buy that transplant, you want to pick up that transplant and literally hold it up to the sun or to the light and look underneath it at the bottom of the leaves and the bottom of the stem to see if there's any damage, any sort of nibble marks or holes, any sort of rust looking discoloration on the leaves, or any sort of disease. But you're also looking for insects, because most insects that are vectored into gardens come from the actual home centers. Because imagine, it's a perfect growing environment for them. Here are these thousands of baby little seedlings in a city or in the countryside, whichever, and one or a couple of bugs get in there and start mass producing, and suddenly every single plant in the whole tray is infected with these aphids or spider mites or something else like that. So I make sure when I select a seedling, I always do that check for every single one. And I buy hundreds of seedlings every season. So I'm always making sure about that. And when I get those home, if I've seen even one thing on there, I'll hold it up with a hose and I'll spray the bottom of that plant with a good jet of water. And that'll blow all those bugs off of there. And the plant is totally fine. And then I'll put it in the ground. And that's a really good way to have bulletproof seedlings, is check them at the home center, rinse them before you put them in your garden or containers.
Good stuff.
How about you, John? I wanted to ask you how you choose seeds.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's a really good question. I look for the organic seeds first, but they're few and far between in the shops up here in Tokyo. But of course, online's the best place to go. I've had some recommendations from Chris Somerville here, who's part of this. Really good recommendations there of some of organic seed companies.
Great
seeds,
timing. I just posted.
oh, thanks a lot. Personally, from what I've read, I think that the most important thing for seeds is the growing environment, which involves the soil and whether or not chemicals are used in the growing process, as opposed to whether the seeds are GMO or organic / heirloom, which is like another word for basically natural seeds. Yeah, so I basically focus on making sure that the growing environment, the soil, and not using chemicals is at the forefront of how I grow food. Yeah, but I'm basically sort of looking for organic seeds first. And also, I'm going to get into basically capturing seeds, because one thing that I sort of learned quite recently is basically that I think our grandparents' generation and every generation like before them, they never bought seeds. They just took seeds off plants. But now, most people, they think, right, we've got to actually go to a shop and buy seeds. We've got to actually pay money for seeds, which is not how things used to be. They used to be free. People just used to collect the seeds off plants and then save them during winter and sow them in spring. And that's the natural way to do it. And I think when it comes to gardening, it's always good to keep to the natural way and just save seeds. But you got to start. Yep, that's about it for seeds, I think. Seedlings, like you said, that was a good point about spraying off the insects. Keep them out. Yep, okay. Yeah, what do you want to go for now, Chuck? What do you hope?
Well, as far as choosing seeds for me, I do the same. I try to stick with the heirloom seeds. And it's funny, you just said it yourself. The people our grandparents' age and before, the seeds were given to them by their parents and grandparents. So they were literally passed down as an heirloom. And that's where the term heirloom seeds comes from. And there's some requirements. I think the seed variety has to be about 50 years old or something. Maybe it's just 20 years. I can't remember. But the most important thing is it has to be true to fruit. So this tomato with these orange spots grew last year. You plant the seed from it. The exact same tomato is going to grow from it then it's an heirloom seed. And that's the problem with hybrids. Hybrids are often robust, easy to grow, sweeter plants. But the problem is you take one of those seeds and try to grow it again, and it either won't grow, it'll be a sterile seed, or it's going to grow something a little bit to a lot different. And if anybody's ever tried to save watermelon seeds or pumpkin seeds, something you buy a watermelon and you get 200 seeds, right? Whereas you go to the shop and you buy a pack of watermelon seeds for 300 or 400 yen, and you get 5 seeds. 5 seeds. For a farmer who's trying to grow 20 plants, that's 2,000 yen investment versus, hey, I got a watermelon, I can grow hundreds of them. I've done that, and it's the worst thing you'll ever do, because you'll grow these beautiful looking huge watermelons that are basically full of water. There's no taste at all. There's no sweetness at all. And they're called pig melons, because so many people have done this. There's a whole group of people growing pig melons, and they're only good for feeding the pigs. So you got to be careful with seed. So that's the difference between heirloom and hybrid in my mind. Yeah, why don't we talk about how to transplant seedlings successfully? Why don't you bring us through? What do you do to put good seedlings in there, John?
Oh yeah, to basically transplant seedlings. Just it's important, of course. And when you buy them from the shop, they'll most likely be in a black plastic cup kind of thing. Just sort of loosen the soil just by squeezing the outside of the black plastic cup, just so that the roots will sort of loosen up. Especially if the seedling's hasn't been watered for like a couple of days in a plant shop, then just basically dig a hole in the soil in your planter box or pot and carefully put the seedling in there, and then just fill in some soil around the sides and just water it, and make sure that you water it every single day. Sowing seeds is the fine to start, and I think it's the place where most people make mistakes. And just a couple of key rules about that. Sowing seeds for people who are either having challenges or who have never sown seeds before. You just basically put the soil into your container, make sure that there's some pot stones down the bottom to filter the water, add some soil up to about 2 to 3 centimeters below the top edge, make it flat, carefully sprinkle seeds evenly on the top of the soil. That's got to be flat, and then cover the seeds with no more than 1 centimeter of soil. That's your fingertip, no more than that. If you put 2 centimeters or 5 centimeters on, you're not going to have much luck, because the seeds will start growing and then they'll die because they run out of energy to break through the soil. So no more than 1 centimeter of soil on top of your seeds. That's probably the most important number in gardening. And then put it in a sunny location, water it every day. And also, if you want to grow more food, there's a thing that I call the bonsai rule. The bonsai trees here in Japan are typically really small because they're grown in either trays or tiny little pots. And bonsai trees are small because the roots have next to no space to grow. If you want larger plants, use larger pots and larger containers so that the roots have maximum space to grow. And all other factors aside, if you use larger pots, your plants will grow larger and you'll have more leaves, more tomatoes, more cucumbers, more paprika, more food. So just think big and aim big, and you'll hopefully get bigger plants. And what about you, Chuck? Tips for transplanting seedlings and sowing seeds?
Well, I wanted to just back up a bit. So you're going to buy the seedling in the home center. You're going to check for bugs and spray it off when you get home. And then something maybe some people forget to do. You got to actually take it out of the container. Don't plant it in the container, because that's just going to create a big problem when those roots are trying to break through this plastic container. So don't forget to take it out of the container. But as far as planting out seedlings and seeds, for me, it's about the same as in containers, I would say. The most important thing for me is preparing the soil in advance. I add all my soil amendments to it. I get my soil nice and fluffy, rich. And then if I'm going to use ground cover, I put that in, and then I go ahead and put my seedlings in. It's just basically like what you make the hole and you plant it. You make sure you deep water it, and you keep it watered for the first week or so, almost every day, because that's when that seedling is really trying to find, its legs, basically. And once it starts growing, you'll be able to see it'll just start picking up. And then actually I'll back off on the watering almost altogether for about a week, because I want it to really set out those roots. When you think about a plant, the roots are basically made to just look for nutrients and water. So if you give it everything it needs right away, it's actually not going to get to be a very healthy plant, because those roots are going to be like, we don't have to grow very big because everything is right here. And a plant is just going to go for that and be like, hey, easy time. We're on vacation. We don't got to do any work. We don't have to produce any food. So if you make that plant look for water and nutrients a little bit, it'll be all the healthier in the long run. So I think that's very important. And as far
Yeah,
as
good point.
seeds go, I mean, I'll plant thousands and thousands of carrot seeds every year. And, you know, it's impossible for me to do it your way, John, where sprinkle the seeds on, then add exactly a centimeter of soil along this whole 20-meter bed. So instead, what I do is I take a long stick that's about 4 meters long, and I run it along the beds to create a trench. And then I sprinkle my seeds in there, and then I pinch the soil back over it. And I can do it so efficiently. People watch me do it, and I can plant a whole 20-meter bed with 5 rows of carrots in about an hour, just because it's a systematic thing. So it's all about shaking the seeds gently out of the packet. That's what really takes. It's kind of like getting the salt and pepper or the seasoning in your food, right? You don't want to overdo it. And, oh my gosh, I just poured them all right there. So it's all about this kind of shaking technique that you get going, and suddenly it's like, oh, just exactly the amount you need each time. So I love seeding, though. It's quite meditative, and I mean, when we think about it, we're planting seeds for food. It's just a big optimistic endeavor. We're just very hopeful with seeds. Yeah, well, we're just about to wrap it up. I think, well, maybe we want to touch a little bit about composting, how to use it, how to make it. What do you think, John?
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I know we'd like to
Composting
open the
is
floor for questions, but let's touch on composting first. Yeah.
Yeah, composting, that's one of the most common questions that I get asked about gardening. And what I basically do myself is create liquid compost, or sometimes called compost tea. I'll just quickly share my screen if it's okay.
Go for it.
Yeah, compost, it looks like, hang on, I hope you could, yeah, can you see that?
Yep.
Bokashi liquid compost. The photo to the left-hand side shows a Bokashi compost maker, which is just like a rubbish bin, and it's got a tightly sealing lid that you open, and then you throw in your kitchen waste. You can throw in your coffee grounds, tea bags, leaves from outside, torn up bits of newspaper, old soil, and there's a little tap down the very bottom, and that's where the liquid compost comes out if your composting works properly, which it should. And bokashi is basically, it's a fermentation process, kind of like natto. It's not normal composting, and you have a bag of this light brown powder that you got to sprinkle in for every 2 or 3 kilograms of organic waste that you throw into your bokashi compost maker. After about 3 months, you can turn, if you turn the tap down the bottom, you'll hopefully get what you can see in the right hand side of your screen. This really dark brown, highly concentrated liquid that you simply mix into your watering container, just a little bit, like a couple of capfuls, in like maybe 1 or 2 liters of your watering container. Stir it up and pour it straight onto your plants. It's the easiest kind of compost you could ever use. And if you keep on making that, then you'll hopefully have that the whole year round. Yeah, so liquid compost, I don't make solid compost. It's a bit of a hassle, and can catch fire sometimes because of the heat that's generated. Yeah. And what about you, Chuck? What do you do?
Oh, I've done the bokashi myself in the city. I've done a bit in the country. I'm doing the traditional composting where I mix my greens and my browns, you know, my kitchen waste with my leaves and stuff like that. But then you got to go find leaves, which is quite an endeavor. I spend mornings going to shrines and picking up leaves here in Kyoto. I've got a good connection there. I can't just go in there and do it myself. I've permission to drive my little K truck in and load up on leaves at Kamigamo Jinjo here in Kyoto, and Daigoji as well. So that's a great thing. Composting leaves is fantastic. But what I'm going to start this year with my son, we're going to do a little project and do vermiculture, which is using red wiggler worms in your kitchen waste, also mixed with leaves or something dry, and creating a really great castings, which is basically the worm poo. And of course, the worm pee would be much like your compost tea there. And we're going to try that this year in the city. It's just do something for kind of sciencey with my son. I love getting him involved with stuff, and I'm very interested to see how this works. So I think if you want to compost in the city, there's a few options. So just give it a try. There's even machines out there you can buy that'll compost it for you. And I think it's a great way to get rid of your kitchen waste. And that's why I started the community program. And I even got a grant for it. So there's a lot of little initiatives out there for people as well. But here's hoping that in all of Japan, they'll put out citywide composting programs where Thursday's your kitchen waste day. Everybody puts it out and then they bring that to a center where they compost it and then give that away to homeowners and garden owners and people like that. That would be the best green solution ever. I would wake up very happy if that would happen. Well, John, that was certainly a lively discussion. I bet there's some people out there with questions. And what we can do is we can let you unmute and ask your questions, or you can type them into the comments part. And yeah, fire away. Otherwise, John and I keep blathering on just about things that interest us. So please ask your questions if you've got them.
Yeah, Chuck, you didn't mention anything about pests. I'm wondering, are you removing all of them by hand, or are you using anything like neem or soapy water or anything like that on some of your plants?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. And I get that a lot from friends and people who visit the farm. I got to say, with insects and things like that, it's all about prevention. That is the key to everything. I mean, if you're growing a couple of cabbage plants next to your house, you can hand pick the green caterpillars off of there and no problem. But if you've got 80 cabbages growing and you've got to do that, that's your whole day. And not only are you picking off the caterpillars, you're going to go before that and pick off the eggs, which are almost microscopic. So it's all about prevention. I really highly recommend something called floating row cover. And what you do is you take these half hoops, these green metal half circle things that you see in the home centers, and you put that along your bed, and then you cover that with a netting, and you bury the edges so the insects, the butterflies that are flying cannot access your plants to begin with to lay those eggs. And then the plants are going to start getting too big and pushing against that netting. Well, by the time they're that size, I open it up and let the caterpillars get at them because the plant is big and vigorous enough to be able to withstand it. Now, the downside being, of course, when you're eating your cabbage, you're getting a little extra protein with the caterpillar you just put in your mouth. But, you know, that's just part of the being organic farmer. You know?
Thank you.
It's a good question. Yeah. But I have used neem, and I've used some homemade insecticidal soaps and things like that you're talking about. But really, prevention is the best cure to me. How about you, John?
Yeah, I basically think down the same lines, and the key thing is that comes from experience is to basically look carefully for when you first start seeing holes appearing in your plant leaves. They might be too late, but hopefully not. And the key thing is when you're growing here in the city is to basically one of the key insect prevention methods is to simply cover your plants with an insect net. And if you can cover your plants with an insect net, then things like butterflies can't land on your leaves. And if butterflies can't land on your leaves, then they can't lay eggs on them either. So that's going to basically get rid of your butterfly / caterpillar problem. Also, yeah, it's well worth looking into do-it-yourself insect sprays, which you can basically find on Google, and they typically contain usually just a few different household things like liquid soap, maybe vinegar, and one or two other things which you just mix up yourself, spray onto your plants. But I think one of the key things here is to not think of insects as the enemy, because they're hungry just like we are, and when they tuck into our food, they're basically sharing, and we need them, and they certainly don't need us. But yeah, so I think it's important just to think of them as not the enemy, but just try and keep them off your plants as much as possible, and sometimes maybe share too. But it's important, I think, to basically change our concept of insects and not think that we just have to kill them all, because we need them. We really do. Yep. And
Actually,
also,
Chris had mentioned something about neem oil, which is something that I have used and I continue using. I believe it's made from a nut, in India, and it's a highly concentrated, syrupy sort of material that's quite stinky, and this puts off a lot of insects from wanting to eat your plants. So it's quite effective. It's a bit expensive to get, and it's shipped halfway, from India. But at the same time, it's something organic, and it's been tested by a lot of people and found useful. So I wouldn't say it's a bad idea. Just again, trying to keep them away. So neem oil is, again, a preventative measure. It's not going to kill the insects if you spray it on them, but it will repel a lot of insects, especially aphids and things like that.
Yep. One more thing too about the insects is that sometimes people complain about insects actually in the soil eating the plant roots, which can completely destroy them, and that often leads to people just basically completely changing their soil and replanting. So that's basically the insects coming from within, underground, which is amazing. That's a pretty big problem. So I guess it's best just to keep them away from the start, like you're saying, like before, Chuck, about making sure that you don't bring insects home from the home store. Yep. Okay. Yep.
Chris mentioned in the notes here about Tani no Mori, great seed company. Check the comments page for those people interested in that. There's a couple other questions or a couple other posts. Jesse says Kyoto City will apparently give you a few thousand yen to buy or build a compost bin in your yard. And then somebody said, is it only for people living in houses, apartment dwellers? I got to say, I've heard of this program. I think it's limited to, there's a limited number of people that can get this, but yes, I think it is still available. There's actually an initiative also that gives away those machines as well, but they're very, very popular. So I think they're snapped up pretty quick, but best to look online to find out how to get some of that. Mathew Porter says, what to do about moving shade? He has a walled-in garden that gets great overhead sunlight, but the shade moves around, so I'm not able to get good constant sunlight in my tomatoes. John, what do you say about that?
Okay. That's a really good question, Matthew. Probably the best answer is to just lift up your planting containers, to elevate them to the highest possible place. So maybe put them on a table. If you have any things like air conditioner units outside, they can be quite flat tables to put planting containers on. So basically just you need to check exactly which part of your yard gets the most sunshine, and then think elevation, 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 raise your plants to so that they are minimally impacted by the shade created by any structures around your place.
Right on.
Yep.
Very good.
Elevation.
Brian mentions other sources for equipment, Jimoti and Mercari apps in Japanese only, but those are great sources of equipment and other things people putting up for sale. It's kind of like a secondhand purchasing thing. And Leiko has an interesting question about grubs. And I think what she's talking about are these cutworms or these baby beetles. She said last year all our tomato plants were destroyed by grubs. What would be a good way to prevent them from getting into the pots? Thanks. And I think what John just mentioned is people just dumping their soil out in the springtime before you plant anything in it and picking them out of there and then putting the soil back in there, because those grubs take quite a while to grow up into a size where they're going to damage your plants. Usually they're overwintering. So if you get them out in the springtime, chances are you'll be good to go for that year. John, do you have anything to add for that?
No, that pretty much covers it all, I think. Yep.
Nice. I mean, there are such things as beneficial nematodes, which are these almost microscopic organisms that live in the soil. And they parasitize these grubs. So if they're in your soil, they're going to attack this grub, take it over, and kill it. And so these are great organic technique to manage these grubs. But the thing is, while they're readily available in places like the States, they're hard to find here, although I have found them available. So you can order them online. That's beneficial nematodes. So if you start looking for that, if you've got a real problem and you want to invest some money, that might be a good way to go. I've actually spoken with a gentleman just last month about he'd like to raise them himself, because there's people who, you can actually grow them yourself if you get a starter kit and everything else. So hopefully he'll be successful and I'll be able to take a page of his book and start producing them myself, because that sounds like a great idea for a farmer. There's no way I could remove all the soil from my beds every spring and sift through it for grubs. So basically nature just takes its course in my garden. So let's see. Victoria says, for composting, is it okay to throw plant kitchen waste on the soil outside your yard, even on the earth into the pots? Otherwise, sometimes dig them into a hole and plant a pot or ground. You just do that. Well, Victoria, you want to be careful about putting green matter into your soil while something is growing in there, because that decomposition process is basically going to sequester all the nitrogen in your soil, and it's not going to make it available for your plants. So it's actually going to hurt your plants, not directly, but indirectly, as those plants would no longer be able to eat the nitrogen that's already in your soil. So I wouldn't put green matter into your soil when something's growing in there. If you just want to bury it in an empty pot, that's fine. It'll decompose just naturally as you want, but make sure it's away from anything growing. John, do you have anything to add about that?
What I normally do at my community gardens is basically dig a hole in some spare space, and then just chuck all the dead plants in there, and also kitchen scraps from home as well, just to sort of re-fertilize the soil. Yep.
Oh, Matsumoto-san has a great tip. She puts the awful little plastic bags you get with everything over the plants till they get strong, and stick a circle of used disposable chopsticks that I get to keep the bags in place. Great for tomato seedlings. What a wonderful hack, way to repurpose some trash that people are just throwing away. I think that's a great idea. Let's see. Diatomaceous soil for grubs for Sowing. Thank you. I didn't know that worked for grubs. I know that works for ants. I've never heard that working for grubs. I'll have to look into that. John, have you ever heard of that? Diatomaceous earth?
No, I've not heard about that at all. Yeah.
Interesting. Sowing, if you want
Jesse
to
talks
tell
about
us more about that, I'd be interested.
Jesse talks about, what do you do during the hot, dry summer months, July, August, where it's hard to keep water in the soil? Two things for city growing there. One, put some mulch on top of your soil to basically reduce or cut down the water evaporation from the soil. So put maybe, you can buy like packets of like tree bark from home stores. Just sprinkle that on top of the soil around your plants, and that will basically cut down how much water dries out from the soil. Number two, try and use larger pots in the city, because the soil in larger pots will dry out slower in a larger pot than they will in a smaller pot. And if your soil dries out around your plant roots, the plant's going to get really stressed to the point where it'll die. So try and use larger containers from the start, like I was saying before, to get the larger plants. And also, one thing that I've really found in the city, where one rooftop garden that I set up just outside Ginza some years ago. It was on top of the 9th floor of a building, and the building manager said that in the summertime it hit 41 degrees. That's like India. But this was Tokyo. So the simple solution, or a simple solution there to keep your plants alive during winter, is to use what's called shade sheets, and they're basically large black plastic sheets with thousands of like perforated holes in them, which cut down the impact of direct sunshine by about 60 to 70%. And that can be the difference between life and death for your plants during summertime. One more little tip is to, if you are growing in planter boxes or pots on a hot surface like your balcony or your rooftop, at the start of summer, lift them up. So put your planter boxes on either little bits on like bits of wood or on bricks, just to lift up your planting container so they're off the surface of the of whatever they're sitting on, and that will let air flow beneath the planting container, which will help to minimize how hot the soil gets. Because if the planter boxes are directly on a hot surface during summertime, they're going to be hit by direct sunshine from above and warmed up by the hot surface that they're sitting on, so they're going to get sandwiched by summer heat. And if you lift up your planting containers, that's at least going to minimize the heat coming up from the bottom. Cover them with a shade sheet. That will hopefully work.
Well done, John. I'd also like to add to that, if you shade your containers, like you wrap them
Yep.
in white plastic or something like that, that'll also keep the containers from superheating in the hot sun. And as well, when you're putting your soil into your containers, at the bottom, of course, you're going to create something for drainage. But what I like to do is buy some really rich compost. You can buy even bark compost. It's pretty cheap. You put a good layer of that, like a couple of centimeters of that. And what that's going to do is retain moisture better than the rest of your soil. And you want it in the bottom of your container because that's where the roots have to delve down and find it. And also it's going to be most protected from the direct sunlight. I do that in my beds as well. Always make sure there's a lot of compost because that stuff really holds on to water. All right. Somebody says we do bokashi. How often, Ann says we do bokashi composting. How often should you apply soil to the compost, and when can you apply the bokashi compost to your garden beds? Well, the actual bokashi, the mass of, solid waste that's finished, from the bokashi is supposed to be buried in soil, not with plants for, I think, a couple of months even to really start breaking down, but it creates a wonderfully well-fertilized bed after that. So that's the kind of thing at the end of the year. If you have containers, you want to go ahead and get a giant container and put some of that solid mass into the soil in that container. And then by next spring, boy, you're going to have a super powered container full of great soil.
Just one more thing about bokashi compost, that liquid compost. I've found it typically takes about 3 months from when you first start putting the organic matter into your bokashi container. Depending on when you start it, like if you start doing that at the start of spring, you're looking at probably about 3 months until you'll be able to turn the tap on the bottom and get some liquid compost. But once you start, you just don't stop. And if you are like me, I want one of these bokashi composting units for Christmas because they work so well. They're really, really good. And you just upscale. And the more that you have, the more kitchen waste you can dump in and the more waste you're not throwing out. And one of the beautiful things about composting, of course, is that it's perfect recycling. You're taking old plants and kitchen waste and they become food for new plants and cutting down the waste that you throw out. It's all good.
Nice, John. Okay, so Christian said, apologies for being late. Will it be recorded? Yes, it will be. It is being recorded, and it will be available on my YouTube channel probably in a couple of days when I can get the time to edit it and actually post it up there. So you'll be able to see it again. Thanks for asking. Jesse says a pretty large plot that he's growing in. Had to find cheap sources of mulch in bulk. Hard to find. Yeah, well, Jesse, it's not readily available to most people. You're just going to have to keep looking for it. But I would say go around to the schools, the shrines, the parks in the autumn and see if you can collect leaves. That's the best mulch I've found for a natural solution of there. Solvig did type about the diatomaceous earth. They're the sharp, pokey skeletons of diatoms, which cut the grubs as they crawl through. I see. There's a link on Japanese Garden site that has a pic of the soil you can buy there. Thank you, Solvig. And you've gotten some thank yous there. Very, very good. Do you remember mixing? So, okay. Jesse's considering farming full-time. Good on you, mate. Or at least on a larger scale. Language abilities suffering. I think, Jesse, you just got to do it. You'll learn. My Japanese is not very good either, but you learn through trial and error, and I think you'll come out on top, mate. I think you're on a good track if you want to start doing it on a bigger scale, because I got to say, there's a reason John and I are so passionate about this. So passionate, not only we're doing it for ourselves and teaching other people, but we're here now and making this event because we are so passionate about this. We know this is something that everybody could plug into and enjoy, because what could be better than stepping out your door, picking some vegetables, putting them straight into your mouth without having to go to the shop, without any plastic, knowing where they came from and being part of that whole process. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say it's spiritual. It's a very fulfilling thing. So I think it's great for everybody to do that. Oh, and John, what did you just post about a bilingual gardening guide?
Just a quick point about that. One of my resources is I've got a bilingual gardening guide, actually 3 of them. And the first one is a Japan planting calendar that I made because I couldn't find one in English myself. So I've actually made one by reading Japanese seed packets. Number 2, I've got a bilingual English-Japanese gardening equipment shopping guide, which you can take to any home center, and it'll give you all the words that you need to buy pots and soil and seeds and so on. And I've also got a bilingual Japanese English gardening vocabulary guide, which has basically got a whole lot of the main words that you'll need, because it's important to actually know these words. It makes a huge difference if you can speak them. Okay. Yep.
Dean's
and if
asking,
anyone
how
wants
can
those,
you,
just
how
let me
can you
know.
access them?
Oh, just mail me. I'll type my email address now. Yep. I'm quite happy to give those away.
Very good. Very, very good. And you can
Yep.
reach out to me at my website as well for any questions you might have. I just typed it in there, midorifarm.net. You can contact me there on Facebook or by email. No worries. We're about wrapping things up here. So if there aren't any other questions, make sure everybody's gotten answers to all their interesting questions. We appreciate you all for coming today. John and I are really happy to see so many people interested in what we're doing and becoming a part of it themselves. I think it's a wonderful endeavor, as I said before. John, do you have anything you want to say before I say my final word?
Yeah. If you have any questions about what you've heard or what you haven't heard, just mail either Chuck or myself, and we'll be more than happy to help. Chuck and I, we're soon going to be launching a joint urban farming and countryside consulting service, where we basically do what we've just done, provide answers to people who have questions about growing food in the countryside and the city. It's going to be quite a comprehensive service, and I think I'll be mailing you out some information about it. I'm really excited about this collaboration between Chuck and myself, because I've spent the last 10 years for my own food here in Tokyo, but Chuck's got a whole lot of experience I don't, and I know like one or two things he doesn't know either. So I think sort of combining, we sort of can provide the best of both worlds, and hopefully inspire as many people as possible to do what our grandparents did and just grow real food. It's a really good thing to do.
I can't agree with you more, John. And you have got a wealth of knowledge that I have yet to tap into, and I am really looking forward as well. You're a very inspiring person to listen to, and I have to say again, the way that you go in there, you teach kids how to grow food and create a social initiative to give it to the people who really need it the most. Kudos, man. I think you're a super farmer. Really, really well done.
Yeah.
In fact, so much so that I want you to create a short film for our SOS green screening. And I'd like to touch on that again, something I mentioned at the beginning. This SOS green screening film festival that we're going to be holding in Kyoto City this year. I hope as many people can be a part of it as possible, not only creating the films, but editing them, being on the volunteer staff, translation, things like that, because this is an opportunity for us to really shine the spotlight on people trying to make a difference. People who haven't been able to really get started because they've got a great idea, they've got a lot of energy, but it needs some sort of a catalyst to really take off. And let's take short videos of these people. It could just be with your smartphone, and just you talking about your passionate idea or filming somebody else's passion idea and submitting it. It should be 3 to 10 minutes in length. Please, just 1080p, no 4K, and submit by August 31st. Again, contact me anytime to get more information. We've got a website set up that I should put a link to, but I can't come up with it just now. But really, it should be a wonderful initiative, and it's something we're going to do every year. And again, you don't have to be in Japan or Kyoto to participate. It's going to be online as well. So we're hoping that everybody can be a part of this. So look for more news there. And as John was saying, we're going to be doing this consulting program more and more. We're also going to maybe creating a bit of a YouTube channel or something like that with a weekly program to zoom in on the farm or in the urban garden. And I'm really looking forward to this collaboration, as John is. And I want to say thank you again for joining us today. And if you're watching this on YouTube, it would be great if you could like and subscribe. That would really help me to know that I need to keep putting these videos out there. And I hope that you can join us on our farms or gardens someday, either live or on Zoom. and learn a little bit more, and maybe even ask us some questions and teach us, because we're still learning as well. There's a big learning curve for growing vegetables. I don't think it's ever going to be like, oh, now I know everything. So without anything else, thank you, John, and thank you, everybody
Thanks,
else.
Chuck.
Really happy to have had you here on the Midori Farm Talk number 10. I'm Chuck Kaiser from Midori Farm. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck.
Goodbye, everyone.
Yeah, here's the other. Okay.